Margaret had been serving coffee and comfort food at Rose's diner for nearly 15 years. Her hands moved with practiced grace as she poured steaming coffee into thick white mugs, the kind that reminded customers of their grandmother's kitchen. The morning rush was always the hardest part of her day, but Margaret faced it with the same quiet determination she brought to everything in her life. She had learned long ago that kindness costs nothing but means everything, especially to folks who might be having the worst day of their lives. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, the autumn leaves were painting the world in shades of amber and gold outside the diner windows. A man walked in alone, looking more tired than anyone should at 9 in the morning. He wore an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the humble diner, but his shoulders carried the weight of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. Margaret noticed these things because she had spent decades watching people really watching them. She could tell when someone needed extra cream in their coffee or when they just needed someone to listen. The man sat in the corner booth, the one that faced away from the busy street where people often went when they wanted to think. Margaret approached with her usual warm smile and a fresh pot of coffee. "Morning, honey," she said gently. "Looks like you could use some of our strongest blend." Robert looked up, and for the first time in months someone was looking at him without wanting something. Not his signature on a contract, not his approval for a merger, just genuine human concern. "That would be perfect," he said, and something in his voice made Margaret pause. She poured his coffee slowly, the way she always did when she sensed someone needed a moment to collect themselves. "First time at Rose's?" she asked, settling into the rhythm of conversation that had served her well over the years. "Yes," Robert said. "I was driving by and something about this place just felt right." Margaret nodded knowingly. Rosie always said this place was meant to be a refuge for weary souls. She paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "She passed 5 years ago, but I like to think her spirit still welcomes folks who need a safe harbor." Robert felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for months. "I'll take whatever you recommend," he said. "I trust your judgment." Margaret's eyes crinkled with warmth. "That's the best thing anyone's said to me all week." She brought him the Tuesday special meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans, the kind of meal that tasted like someone's mother had made it with love. But what happened next surprised even Margaret. Robert took one bite and tears began to form in his eyes. "This tastes exactly like my mother's meatloaf," he said quietly. "She died 10 years ago and I haven't tasted anything like this since." Margaret sat down across from him, something she rarely did during the busy morning hours. "Tell me about her," she said simply. And so Robert did. He told her about growing up in a small house where his mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. How she would come home exhausted but still find the energy to make dinner from scratch because she believed meals were how families showed love. How she taught him that success meant nothing if you forgot where you came from. Margaret listened the way she had learned to listen over the years, with her whole heart. When Robert finished talking, she reached across the table and squeezed his hand gently. "Your mother sounds like she was quite a woman," Margaret said, "and she raised a good son, I can tell." Robert looked at this waitress, this stranger who had shown him more genuine care in one morning than he had received from colleagues and business associates in years. "You know," he said, "I make a lot of important decisions in my work, but I can't remember the last time someone trusted my judgment about something as simple as what to order for breakfast." Margaret smiled. Sometimes the simple things matter most. As the morning went on, Margaret continued to check on Robert, refilling his coffee and bringing him a slice of homemade apple pie. She told him about her own children, how she had raised 2 kids mostly on her own after her husband passed. How working at the diner had taught her that everyone has a story and everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. "You have a gift," Robert said as Margaret brought his check. "What kind of gift?" she asked, genuinely curious. "You see people really see them," he said. "That's rarer than you might think." Margaret blushed slightly. "I just treat folks the way I'd want to be treated." Robert left that morning, but he couldn't stop thinking about the diner, about Margaret, and about how long it had been since he felt truly seen by another human being. 3 weeks later, Margaret was surprised to see the well-dressed man return. This time he wasn't alone. He brought with him a woman about Margaret's age with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Margaret," Robert said, "I'd like you to meet my sister Linda." Linda embraced Margaret like an old friend. "Robert hasn't stopped talking about you," she said, "about how you made him feel like family." As they sat in the same corner booth, Robert told Margaret something that made her nearly drop her coffee pot. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I'm Robert Mitchell. I'm actually the CEO of Comfort Foods, the company that owns this diner chain." Margaret's eyes widened, but before she could speak, Robert continued. "I came here that morning because we were considering closing this location," he said quietly. "The numbers weren't good and my board was pushing for cuts." He paused, looking around the diner at the mismatched chairs and faded photographs on the walls. "But after spending time here, after meeting you, I realized we were looking at all the wrong numbers." Margaret sat down slowly, trying to process what she was hearing. "You see," Robert continued, "we had forgotten what made these diners special in the first place. It wasn't just the food, it was the people like you who create a sense of community." Linda reached across and took Margaret's hand. "Robert has completely changed how the company operates," she said proudly, "because of what he learned here." Robert nodded. "We're investing in our people, training them not just to serve food but to serve with heart, the way you do naturally." Margaret felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll help us," Robert said. "I want to offer you a position as our Director of Guest Relations. You'll travel to our diners and teach our staff what it means to really care for people." Margaret looked around the diner that had been her second home for 15 years. The booths where she had served coffee to truck drivers and teachers, to lonely seniors and young families. Where she had celebrated birthdays and comforted people through losses. "Will I still get to work with people directly?" she asked. "Every single day." Robert promised. "You'll be showing others how to create the same warmth you've brought to this place." 6 months later, Margaret stood in a diner in Kansas training a young waitress named Sarah. "Remember," she said gently, "everyone who walks through that door is carrying something, whether it's joy or sorrow or just the weight of an ordinary day." Sarah nodded eagerly, taking notes. "Your job isn't just to bring them food," Margaret continued, "it's to let them know that for this moment in this place they matter." That evening Margaret called Robert to tell him about her day. "You know," she said, "I never imagined that treating people with kindness would lead to something like this." Robert smiled on the other end of the phone. "That's exactly why it worked," he said. "Real kindness can't be manufactured or trained, it has to come from the heart." As Margaret hung up the phone, she thought about all the small moments of connection that had brought her to this point. The tired businessman who just needed someone to listen. The elderly woman who came in every Tuesday because she was lonely. The young mother juggling 2 toddlers who just needed a patient smile. She had never thought of these interactions as anything special. But now she understood that kindness, like ripples in a pond, spreads far beyond what we can see. And sometimes those ripples come back to us in ways we never could have imagined. Margaret had spent years serving others with love. Now she would spend her remaining years teaching others to do the same. Because in the end she realized the most important ingredient in any recipe isn't something you can measure. It's the love you put into every single serving.